Welcome to our story, family. When the sun peeks through the cobblestone streets of Boston, I am always the first one to wake up in my small apartment in the North End. My name is Mary Carter. I am 68 years old, and I have worked my entire life as a telecommunications technician for AT&T. Yes, it was me who climbed those endless poles, with calloused hands and an aching back, under the scorching summer sun or the torrential autumn rains. "Good morning, Edward," I whisper every morning while I caress the silver frame of the photograph on my nightstand. My Edward, who passed away 15 years ago, but whose smile continues to light up my days. Sometimes, when the silence becomes too heavy, I can feel his reply. "Good morning, my brave Mary. It is not easy to be a widow in a society where women my age become practically invisible. But I do not complain. I have built a decent life with my own hands, and above all, I raised a wonderful son. Or, at least, that is what I believed until recently. David, my only son, was always my pride and my reason to keep moving forward after losing Edward. I remember him as a little boy, with his scraped knees and his mischievous smile, running through the Boston Common. I remember his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I remember him as a teenager, embarrassed whenever I came home in my work uniform, stained and sweaty. "Mom, could you not change your clothes before coming to pick me up?" He used to tell me, and I would smile, understanding that at that age, we all just want to fit in. Now David is 42 years old. He is a marketing executive at a major company, and he is about to marry Paige Montgomery, a girl from a good family, as they say around here. I met her 3 years ago, during an awkward dinner at a restaurant that was way too fancy for my taste. From the very first moment, I noticed how she watched me with that look that scans you from top to bottom and finds you lacking. Her eyes stopped on my hands, rough after decades of hard work, and then on my simple dress bought on clearance. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carter," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "David has told me so much about you." That night, while David talked enthusiastically about their future plans, I noticed how Paige steered the conversation toward topics where I could not participate, like trips to exotic destinations I have never visited, exclusive restaurants where I have never eaten, and luxury brands I have never been able to afford. It was her subtle way of leaving me out, of marking the difference between her world and mine. In spite of everything, I forced myself to accept her. For David, I told myself, only for my David. When they announced their engagement a year ago, David called me overflowing with joy. "Mom," she said, "yes, we are getting married in May of next year." "Congratulations, my dear. I am so happy for you," I replied with absolute sincerity, because I truly was. If my son was happy, I was happy too. That very same night, I made a firm decision. I opened the small metal box I kept under my bed, where I had been saving for my retirement, and I started running the numbers. Paige always talked about Hawaii as her dream destination. The Four Seasons resort in Maui is simply divine. I had heard her say that, but so expensive. We would have to wait for years. No, I thought. They would not have to wait. I would make sure of that. For the next 2 years, I saved every single dollar I could. I cut expenses wherever it was possible and even impossible. I stopped buying myself new clothes. I reduced my groceries to the bare minimum. I even, and I did not tell this to anyone, started skipping some doses of my blood pressure medication, stretching it out so it would last longer. All of this just to save up $20,000. Everything just to see the look of pure happiness on my son's face when I told him his honeymoon was fully paid for. Everything to earn, perhaps, a look of approval from Paige. The week before the wedding, David sent me a text message with the account details for the resort where they would be staying, and it was time to make the wire transfer, to materialize 2 years of heavy sacrifice into a gift that I was absolutely sure would make them immensely happy. That morning, I put on my straw hat, the one Edward gave me on our last anniversary, and I walked to the bank with a heart full of hope. While I waited for my turn, I imagined David's reaction, his surprise, his joy, maybe even his tears of emotion. Every sacrifice was completely worth it for that single moment. Then my phone vibrated, a text message. I opened the message with trembling fingers, expecting perhaps some question from David about the wedding. What I read left me completely paralyzed. "Mom, do not even bother coming to the wedding. Paige does not want you there. She says your presence would ruin everything." I stood frozen, with the phone in my hand, reading those exact words over and over again. Each one felt like a dagger straight to my heart. My presence would ruin the wedding of my very own son. All around me, the line at the bank kept moving forward. Someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Ma'am, it is your turn." I looked up, totally dazed. In my pocket was the slip for the wire transfer. It only took one click, just one simple motion to gift them the trip of their dreams. To a son who had just forbidden me from attending his own wedding, in that very moment, something broke deep inside of me. But also, something hardened. I stepped out of the line without saying a single word. I sat down on a nearby bench and opened my banking app. With fingers that were now completely steady, I canceled the transfer. Then, I blocked David's phone number. The walk back home was strange. I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked with my head held high through the streets of Boston, waving at my neighbors just like any other normal day. But on the inside, a massive hurricane was destroying everything in its path. When I got home, I sat out on my small balcony overlooking the street. The bougainvilleas I took such good care of seemed to mock me with their cheerful, bright pink color. It was right then that the tears began to fall, silent but absolutely unstoppable. I remembered when David was 7 years old and he fell off his bicycle, breaking his arm. I spent 3 entire nights at the hospital, holding his little hand without getting a wink of sleep, just whispering to him that everything was going to be all right. I remembered how I turned down a major promotion because it meant traveling more, and I did not want to leave David all alone after losing his father. I remembered every single sacrifice, every moment of unconditional love. And now, so many years later, he was telling me that my presence would ruin his wedding. Through my tears, I made a firm decision. That money would no longer go to them. It would be for me to finally start living for myself for the first time in many decades. What I never imagined was that this cruel text message would only be the beginning of an even bigger storm, because David and Paige were not going to settle for a no. And what would come next would be lower, dirtier, and far more painful than anything I could have ever foreseen. I barely slept at all that night. I stayed out on the balcony, listening to the distant hum of the cars down on the avenue and the occasional bark of a stray dog. David's message kept playing on a loop in my head over and over again. "Mom, do not even bother coming. Paige does not want you there." They were not just words. They were daggers, because behind every syllable was the painful confirmation of something I had already felt deep down inside for a very long time when it came to them. I simply did not matter anymore the very next day, with puffy eyes but an unbreakable resolve. The first thing I did was go right back to the bank. I asked to speak with the branch manager, a young man in his 30s named Martin, who had always treated me with such kindness and patience. "I want to freeze all of my accounts so that absolutely no one else, not even by mistake, can move a single dollar without my strict authorization," I told him very calmly. He looked at me surprised, but he did not ask too many questions. He prepared all the paperwork, offered me a cup of coffee, and in a matter of minutes, everything was locked down tight. I walked out of that bank feeling lighter, as if I had just dropped a heavy backpack I had been carrying around for years. But deep down inside, I knew that it was not going to be enough. David was not just going to sit back and do nothing, and neither would Paige. People who are so used to getting their way never accept a no for an answer without putting up a fight, and I was entirely right. That very same afternoon, while I was changing some light bulbs in the living room, my cell phone vibrated. Unknown caller ID. I answered just out of habit. On the other end of the line was Paige's cold voice. "Mrs. Carter, I am calling you because David asked me to do so. He is very worried. He says he still has not received the wire transfer for the honeymoon. The vacation package expires tomorrow morning." Her tone was sharp and clipped, almost demanding. For a brief moment I felt my hand start to shake, but I took a deep breath and answered very slowly, "Paige, listen to me very carefully. There is not going to be any transfer, and tell my son that if you both keep insisting, I will go straight to a lawyer." There was a very awkward silence on the line. It took her a few seconds to finally react. Finally, with that cynical tone she always used, she said, "Very well, Mary. Do it your way. Just do not complain later when you are the one to blame for ruining the most important moment in your son's entire life." And she hung up. I stayed sitting there with the phone in my hand, still hearing the loud click of the call ending. That was the very last time I ever spoke to her. But it was certainly not the last time they tried to break me. 3 days later, while I was having a cup of coffee and a bagel out on my balcony, my phone rang once again. This time it was David. I did not answer. Almost immediately, a text message came through. "I do not know what is wrong with you, Mom. People are saying you are losing your mind. If you do not fix this right away, I will have to find another solution." For the very first time in weeks, I let out a bitter laugh, not out of joy, but out of pure resignation. Because as I read those words, I understood something with crystal clarity. This was no longer the little boy I used to hold in my arms whenever he was sick. This was a cold and calculating man, fully willing to humiliate his own mother just to get his hands on some money. That was exactly when I decided to seek professional legal help. I went to see Mr. Miller, an older attorney who came highly recommended by one of my neighbors. I told him absolutely everything from the very beginning without hiding a single detail. The man listened to me patiently, and then he said with a firm voice, "Mary, you did the right thing by canceling that bank transfer, and what we are going to do right now is protect your assets. No one will be able to move anything without your explicit consent, and if your son tries anything funny, we will have more than enough evidence to stop him dead in his tracks." I walked out of his office feeling the very first spark of peace in my chest. Finally, someone was telling me that I was not crazy, that what I was doing made perfect sense, but that calm feeling did not last very long. 4 days later, I was drinking coffee out on the balcony when I heard a car park right in front of my building. It was David. He was wearing that fake smile of his that never ever reached his eyes. "Mom, we really need to talk," he said from the front door. I crossed my arms and answered him without even moving from the balcony. "Talk from right down there." "David, there is absolutely no need for you to come inside." He tried to keep his composure, but his voice was trembling with pure rage. "What is wrong with you, Mom? I have already made binding commitments, the travel agency, the resort. You cannot just freeze everything up like this." "That is your problem, not mine," I replied without a single moment of hesitation. Then he finally dropped his mask, slammed his hand against the door, and raised his voice. "Are you seriously going to do this to me after everything I have done for you?" I looked him straight in the eyes and answered dryly, "What exactly have you done for me?" "David, it was always the other way around. Every single time you came looking for me, it was because you needed something." He was left completely speechless, red with anger, until, in a whisper filled with venom, he said, "If you do not want to fix this the easy way, I am going to do it the hard way. I will go talk to a judge. I will tell them that you are no longer in your right mind, that you cannot manage your own money. And then we will see who really gets to decide." That day, I understood exactly how far he was willing to go. It was not just mere contempt. It was a direct threat to take away what rightfully belonged to me, to have me declared legally incompetent and take full control of absolutely everything. I stood completely still, feeling the heat rise hot through my veins. But I did not raise my voice. I just replied, "Try whatever you want to try. David, but never forget that I am still your mother." He was definitely not expecting that answer. He looked at me with pure fury. He turned around on his heels and left without even saying goodbye. That very same afternoon, I went back to see Mr. Miller. I told him word for word about David's awful threat. The lawyer listened to me with a deep frown and said, We are going to get ahead of this right now. Tomorrow morning, we will draft a notarized sworn affidavit, and we will also get a medical certificate proving your total mental clarity. With all of that, any attempt at a legal guardianship will crumble into pieces in a matter of seconds. And so that is exactly what we did. By the very next day, I had every single paper signed, every document laminated, and safely stored away in a sturdy blue folder. For the first time in a very long while, I felt genuinely proud of myself, proud of not letting them humiliate me anymore. But David did not stop there. 3 days later, I received a judicial notice. He had initiated guardianship proceedings, claiming that I could no longer manage my own assets. What David did not know was that I had already anticipated absolutely everything. When I received the court summons, my hands shook. The mail carrier handed me a thick envelope with my full name, exact address, and an official seal, written in cold and formal letters. My own son had filed for legal guardianship, arguing that I no longer possessed the mental capacity to handle my finances. I sat out on the balcony looking at the opened paper resting on my lap. I did not cry, I did not fall into despair, but deep inside the anger was boiling hot. How was this even possible? How could David, the very same boy I cared for through endless nights whenever he had a fever, accusing me right now of being totally incompetent? I did not wait long to react. I put the documents into a folder, and the next morning I showed up early at Mr. Miller's office. When he saw me walk in with the envelope in my hand, he already knew exactly what I was bringing. He opened it slowly, reviewed every single page, and when he finished, he looked up and said with a firm voice, "Mary, this is not just a lack of respect, this is outright fraud. Your son is trying to strip you of absolutely everything. But do not worry. You already have the notarized sworn affidavit and the medical certificate. With those specific documents, this pathetic attempt will not go anywhere." His words calmed me down, but not entirely, because it is one thing to have your paperwork in order and a totally different thing to face the public humiliation of a judge asking you if you are truly in your right mind. I barely slept a wink that night. I remembered so many things. Like when David lost his very first job and I covered his living expenses for 6 full months, paying his rent, electricity, and even his groceries. Or when he bought his first car and I helped him with the down payment, I never ever asked for anything in return, and now he was paying me back with lawyers, with fake papers, and with the clear intention of declaring me legally incompetent. The court hearing was scheduled for exactly 1 week later. Mr. Miller told me not to worry, that he had already prepared our strong defense with all the necessary documents, but I just could not shake off the terrible anxiety. Every morning when I woke up, I reviewed my blue folder all over again, the laminated papers, the medical certificate, the sworn affidavit, my expense receipts. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, as if that would give me some extra strength. On the day of the hearing, I woke up way before dawn. I put on my best button-down shirt, a dark blue one that I saved strictly for important occasions. I also ironed my twill trousers and polished my shoes until they shined brightly. It was not out of sheer vanity, it was out of pure dignity. I wanted the judge to see me for who I truly am, a conscious and hard-working woman, fully capable of taking care of herself. Mr. Miller was waiting for me right at the entrance of the courthouse. He shook my hand warmly and said, "Keep completely calm. Mary, you just have to answer peacefully. The documents will speak for themselves." We walked into the courtroom together. The air conditioning was freezing cold, and the low hum of the ceiling fans gave me terrible chills. Right in front of us, sitting at an elevated desk, was the judge wearing a black robe, and on the other side of the room, David and Paige. Seeing them, there was a very hard blow. David actively avoided my gaze, but Paige maintained hers with that haughty expression I knew so very well, looking as if she had already won the battle. The judge opened the hearing with a solemn voice. "We are here today to review the petition for legal guardianship filed by David Carter against his mother, Mary Carter." Hearing my name spoken like that, as if I were a common criminal on trial, made me shudder, but I stood my ground. David's attorney spoke up first. He argued that I was no longer capable of managing my own assets, that I forgot basic things, that I was putting the family inheritance at serious financial risk. He even presented witnesses who claimed to have seen me wandering disoriented out on the street, people whom I did not even know at all. Entirely fabricated lies, just to drag my good name through the mud. When our turn finally came, Mr. Miller stood up calmly, opened the blue folder, and began to present the documents one by one. Your Honor, here is the notarized sworn affidavit, where Mrs. Carter declares full consciousness of her actions. Here is the medical certificate issued by a top specialist confirming her total mental clarity. And right here are the records of her financial management, which clearly show that she keeps her bank accounts in perfect order. The judge took every single document and reviewed them all very seriously. I watched him from my seat, with my heart beating fast, but with my head held extremely high. Then it was my turn to speak up. The judge asked me if I fully understood why I was there. Of course I know why I am here, Your Honor. I am sitting here because my very own son wants to take away what rightfully belongs to me, inventing ridiculous lies that I lack mental capacity. But I am still the exact same woman who worked for 40 years as a telecommunications technician, who raised her son making endless sacrifices, and who now only asks for basic respect. My voice came out strong, without a single hint of hesitation. I saw David lower his head in shame and Paige visibly bite her lip. The hearing continued for almost a full hour. At the very end, the judge spoke with absolute clarity. After thoroughly reviewing the submitted documentation and listening closely to Mrs. Carter, this court officially determines that the petition for guardianship is firmly denied. Furthermore, I am referring this specific case to the district attorney's office to formally investigate possible perjury and fraud regarding the statements submitted today. In that exact instant, I felt an immense wave of relief. I did not jump for joy. I did not cause a big scene. I just closed my eyes for a few brief seconds and took a very deep breath. Justice. That is exactly what I had just received. On our way out, Mr. Miller placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and said, "Do you see, Mary? The truth always comes out into the light. Now we are going to prepare the criminal complaint against both of them." I nodded in total silence. I knew that this terrible battle was only just beginning. David and Paige were never going to be stopped by a simple court ruling. People exactly like them always find another nasty way to attack. That afternoon, back at my apartment, I sat out on the balcony with a strong cup of coffee. I watched the bright orange sunset and thought deeply about everything that had happened over these past few weeks. I had gone from being a loving mother totally willing to sacrifice her life savings out of pure love to becoming the main target of a cruel and vicious betrayal. And the worst part was that it did not come from a total stranger, but from my very own son. While I slowly sipped my coffee, I made a solemn promise to myself. I would never, ever let anyone trample over me again. That old phase of enduring things and keeping quiet was completely over. From this moment onward, every single attempt made by David and Paige would be met with the absolute truth, with solid documents, and with unwavering dignity. What I did not know then was that they would not just settle for their miserable failure in the courts. The very next blow would be even lower. And this time it would put at risk not only my hard-earned assets, but also my good reputation throughout the entire neighborhood. But while the sun slowly hid behind the tall buildings of Boston, a burning question kept eating me up inside. Why? What exactly had driven my own son to reach this horrible extreme? What was really going on behind closed doors? That very same night, right after the court hearing, I received a completely unexpected phone call. It was Carol, an old coworker from AT&T who now worked for a local real estate agency. "Mary, are you sitting down? I really think you ought to know this. David has bought a massive house in Wellesley, a house worth $500,000. I literally felt the solid ground open up right beneath my feet. What are you talking about? That is entirely impossible. His salary simply does not cover something like that. I know that. That is exactly why I am calling you. They signed the mortgage paperwork just a week ago. I found out because my boss personally knows the people who closed the real estate deal. They say they paid a massive down payment, almost $100,000. Nobody can understand where in the world that kind of money came from. After I hung up the phone, all the puzzle pieces finally began to click together. David and Paige desperately needed cash to cover that huge down payment. That was the real reason behind the heavy insistence on the bank transfer. That was the reason behind the nasty guardianship attempt. It was never just about a fancy honeymoon. It was about something much bigger than that. The next day, I decided to do some digging of my own. Through another friendly neighbor who worked at the bank where David kept his account, I discovered something even more deeply troubling. Paige came from a family that appeared to be extremely wealthy, but they were actually right on the very verge of total bankruptcy. Her father had made some terrible investments and held massive financial debts. The fancy image of wealth they constantly projected was nothing more than just that, an empty image. David, who was currently working for Paige's family company, probably knew all of this and was extremely desperate to keep up fake appearances. They had promised to buy that expensive house, they had made big financial commitments, and now they needed to plug up that massive hole in their finances however they possibly could. I also remembered old conversations with David throughout the years. How ashamed he felt whenever I showed up at his high school wearing my dirty work uniform. How he started to distance himself right after he met Paige and began hanging out in much wealthier social circles. How, one time, after a family dinner, he casually commented, "Mom, could you not buy yourself some more elegant clothes? Paige says you always look like you just walked right out of a flea market." It hurt me deeply at the time, but I simply blamed it on Paige's bad influence. Now I finally saw the complete and ugly picture. My son had always felt deeply ashamed of me, of my humble beginnings, of my hard manual labor, and Paige had only managed to exacerbate those terrible feelings. With these shocking revelations, my inner determination grew much stronger. I finally understood that this was no longer just a silly issue about money. It was a fierce battle for my own dignity against a son who deep down inside had never really accepted who I truly was. That night, as I reviewed my blue folder and prepared myself for whatever was coming next, I felt strangely at peace. I was no longer just the helpless victim in this sad story. I was a strong woman armed with actual knowledge, with hard proof, and, most importantly, with the absolute truth clearly on her side. What David and Paige completely failed to realize was that, while they were busy plotting their next big attack, I was already 3 whole steps ahead of them. Not out of mere cunning, but out of something much more simple, pure honesty. And so, with my blue folder tucked right under my arm and my heart feeling much lighter, I went straight to sleep, totally ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, because now I finally understood the hidden motives. And exactly like Edward always used to tell me, "Mary, whenever you finally understand the real why, you have already won half the battle." The very next morning, after discovering the ugly truth about the house in Wellesley, I woke up with a strange feeling of total calm. It was no longer just a gut feeling. Now I perfectly understood exactly why my son had gone so incredibly far. The desperate, clawing need for quick cash, the deep shame regarding his humble roots, and the highly toxic influence of Paige had successfully turned my David into someone I barely even recognized. While I was busy preparing my morning coffee, I heard the doorbell ring. It was way too early for any normal visitors. With a good deal of caution, I peeked right through the peephole. 2 grown men wearing dark business suits were waiting outside my door. I cracked the door open just enough to be able to speak. "Are you Mrs. Mary Carter?" asked the taller man, speaking in a very flat, monotone voice. "Yes, that is me." "Judicial summons," he said, handing me a large manila envelope bearing the official seal of the local courthouse. "Please sign right here." My hands trembled just slightly as I reached out to take the pen. I already knew exactly what was inside that envelope before I even ripped it open. Back in the safety of my kitchen, with the front door firmly locked, I spread all the legal documents out over the table. It was exactly what I had feared the most. David had not given up the fight. Following the miserable failure of the very first court hearing, he was now filing a completely new, formal, and highly detailed petition for legal guardianship, strongly arguing that I was suffering from progressive cognitive decline and was totally incapable of managing my own financial affairs. "What a bastard," I whispered out loud. He had attached written statements from supposed medical doctors who had never ever treated me, and wild testimonies from neighbors who swore they had seen me acting completely disoriented and highly confused. The absolute worst part was not the ugly lies themselves, but simply knowing that my very own son had carefully orchestrated this entire circus. Every forged signature, every single invented testimony, every highly fraudulent document carried the invisible, dirty stamp of his total financial desperation. I stood there looking straight out the window, watching how the bright morning sunlight gradually illuminated the busy streets of Boston. A totally normal day for everyone else, but for me, the very beginning of a battle much larger than I had ever dared to imagine. Without wasting a single second, I picked up the phone and called Mr. Miller. "Good morning, Mary," he answered with his usual calm tone. "How are you doing today?" "I have just been served with brand new court papers," I replied, trying my very best to maintain my composure. "David simply will not give up. He has now filed a formal petition for full guardianship armed with completely falsified medical records." There was a brief, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "This is far more serious than I originally thought," he finally said. "Mary, I need you to come down to my office as soon as humanly possible, and please make sure to bring absolutely all the documents." Exactly 2 hours later, I was sitting right across from Mr. Miller in his busy downtown office. The attorney meticulously reviewed every single page of the formal petition, scribbling notes and occasionally shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "They have been incredibly cunning," he eventually commented. "This time they have built a much more elaborate and complex case. They are presenting a supposed long history of erratic behavior, heavily coordinated testimonies. They have even managed to forge medical reports bearing stamps that look completely authentic." "But it is all a giant pack of lies," I protested strongly. "I have never even visited those doctors. Those supposed neighbors barely even know who I am." "I know that, Mary. And that is precisely why we are going to counterattack with full force. We will urgently need to gather far more compelling evidence. A complete medical examination with a highly respected specialist, sworn testimonies from people who actually know you extremely well, and solid banking records clearly proving your full capacity to manage your finances correctly." We spent the next several hours carefully putting together a solid defense plan. Mr. Miller contacted a highly renowned neurologist to schedule a full evaluation. He also strongly advised me to gather my detailed bank statements from the last 3 years and to actively seek out solid testimonies from close friends and former co-workers. "The new hearing is scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from now," he explained to me. "We have very little time, but it will be enough if we organize ourselves well. The most important thing, Mary, is that you keep your cool. This is exactly what they want: to upset you, to totally confuse you, to make you commit silly mistakes that they can later use straight against you." I walked out of his office carrying a long list of tasks and a swirling mix of contradictory emotions. On one hand, the burning indignation and deep pain of knowing my son was pushing forward with his evil plan. On the other hand, a completely renewed determination to aggressively defend myself. The very next day, while I patiently waited for my turn in the waiting room of Dr. Foster, the specific neurologist highly recommended by Mr. Miller, I simply could not help but feel extremely nervous. What if he actually found something genuinely wrong with my brain? At 68 years old, even though I felt perfectly lucid, that nagging shadow of a doubt was always hovering right there. "Mrs. Carter," the friendly nurse called out, sharply interrupting my worried thoughts. Dr. Foster was a middle-aged man with a very warm smile and highly attentive eyes. He carefully explained that we would be running a full battery of comprehensive, cognitive, and neurological tests. "Do not worry at all," he kindly reassured me. They are not extremely difficult, they just require some focus. The main goal is to fully evaluate your mental functions, your memory, your attention span, your logical reasoning, and your spatial and temporal orientation. Over the course of the next 2 hours, I correctly answered countless questions, solved logic problems, memorized long sequences of random numbers, carefully drew complex geometric figures, and performed a whole series of tasks designed to deeply test various cognitive abilities. Some of them were quite simple for me, while others were a bit more challenging. But at absolutely no point did I ever feel lost or confused. When we finally finished, the doctor looked right at me with a very reassuring expression. "Mrs. Carter, please allow me to be entirely frank with you. Your test results are absolutely excellent for any age group, not just for your current age. Your cognitive capacity is totally intact and wonderfully preserved. There is absolutely no indication whatsoever of cognitive decline or early onset dementia." I instantly felt an immense wave of relief wash over me, even though deep down inside I already knew that I was perfectly fine. The doctor handed me a highly detailed medical report to officially present before the judge, totally certifying my full mental capacity. "I wish you the very best of luck with your difficult legal situation," he told me as we said our goodbyes. "And if you will allow me one piece of personal advice, please do not let this awful situation destroy your mental health. Continuous daily stress can be incredibly harmful to the body." That very same afternoon, I visited 3 of my old coworkers from AT&T, who gladly agreed to testify firmly in my favor. Michael, who had worked side by side with me for over 20 years, was particularly outraged when I told him about the ugly situation. "Your son is doing exactly what? But you are quite literally one of the most organized and highly competent people I have ever known. Do you not remember when they actively promoted you to field supervisor way before they ever promoted me? Even despite being a woman in an era when that was almost entirely impossible, it was precisely due to your crystal-clear mental focus and your amazing problem-solving skills." His kind words comforted my heavy heart. Sometimes, right in the middle of all this terrible madness, it was far too easy to forget who I truly was. I dedicated the following days to obsessively gathering hard evidence, bank statements that clearly showed an impeccable management of my finances, sorted receipts perfectly organized by date and category, utility bills paid right on time, everything perfectly arranged inside my trusty blue folder, which had now fully become the ultimate symbol of my resistance. Exactly 1 week before the court hearing, I received a troubling phone call from Carol, my friendly neighbor from the 5th floor, who had basically become my closest confidant during this incredibly difficult period. "Mary, I really do not know how to tell you this. David and Paige have been actively visiting several different neighbors all around the building. They are falsely telling them that you are having severe episodes of confusion, that they have personally seen you talking completely to yourself out on the balcony, and that sometimes you do not even recognize normal people." I felt a sharp stab of pure emotional pain. They were no longer just legally attacking my mental capacity, they were actively destroying my good reputation in the very place where I had lived peacefully for decades. "And are people actually believing them?" I asked, my voice barely above a tiny whisper. "Well, some of them are, especially the folks who do not really know you all that well, but plenty of others are absolutely outraged. Mrs. Parker from the 2nd floor totally kicked them out of her apartment the second they started talking badly about you. And Mr. Phillips, the guy who runs the convenience store down the block, boldly told them that if he ever caught them spreading nasty rumors again, he would immediately call the police." As I hung up the phone, I felt deeply torn between the terrible pain caused by my son's betrayal and my profound gratitude toward those good neighbors who remained fiercely loyal to me. That night, sitting out on my small balcony right under the starry Boston sky, I made a very firm decision. Merely defending myself in a courtroom simply would not be enough. I desperately needed to publicly defend my good name as well. I grabbed my cell phone and recorded a very simple video of myself, Mary Carter, explaining with a clear and firm voice exactly who I was, exactly how my last few years had been, and the awful legal situation I was currently facing. To all my lovely neighbors, my dear friends, and my casual acquaintances, I am Mary Carter. Some of you have known me personally for decades. For 40 years, I worked incredibly hard at AT&T, single-handedly raising my son as a single mother after tragically losing my beloved husband. Today, I find myself completely forced to make this video because my own son, David, and his fiancée, Paige, are actively spreading totally false rumors about my mental health with the sole, ugly objective of taking control of my modest life savings. I simply want you all to know that I am perfectly fine, just as you can plainly see for yourselves. If any of you have any doubts or questions, my front door is always wide open. I immediately sent the recorded video to absolutely all of my contacts and politely asked them to share it around. The beautiful response was completely immediate. Text messages filled with support, warm phone calls from old coworkers, and even surprise visits from good neighbors bringing homemade pastries or just dropping by to chat and show their wonderful solidarity. The morning of the big court hearing dawned with a totally clear sky and a radiantly bright sun. I dressed myself very carefully, putting on a sharp navy blue suit that I strictly reserved for highly special occasions, comfortable yet elegant shoes, and the lovely pearl necklace that Edward had gifted me for our 20th wedding anniversary. I desperately wanted the judge to look over and see a dignified woman, not some confused old lady. Mr. Miller was patiently waiting for me right on the front steps of the courthouse. Accompanied by Carol, Michael, and 2 other former co-workers who had kindly come down to testify, I felt a massive wave of pure gratitude rushing over me when I saw them standing right there, fully willing to defend my honor and my mental capacity. Inside the cold courtroom, David and Paige were already seated right next to their expensive lawyer, a very young man wearing a flashy suit and sporting a highly arrogant expression. Paige was wearing a fairly discreet but visibly expensive dress, and David was wearing a tailored suit I had never ever seen him wear before. Both of them completely avoided looking my way when I proudly walked in. The tense hearing began with the formal presentation of the petition by David's flashy attorney. He literally spoke for almost half an hour, painting a highly fabricated portrait of me that I did not recognize in the slightest, describing a frail, older woman suffering from severe episodes of confusion, totally incapable of remembering basic facts, who impulsively wasted money and aggressively rejected the loving help of her supposedly worried son. Then he officially presented his witnesses, a shady doctor who falsely claimed to have evaluated me even though I had never laid eyes on him in my entire life, 2 random neighbors whom I barely even knew, and a supposed social worker who falsely testified to having received multiple concerned phone calls regarding my living situation. Every single lie hurt me just like a physical slap to the face, but I sat up perfectly straight, taking deep breaths and constantly reminding myself that the honest truth was right on my side. When our turn finally arrived, Mr. Miller began his defense very methodically. First, he formally presented Dr. Foster's comprehensive medical report, heavily highlighting the extreme thoroughness of the evaluation and the absolutely unequivocal medical conclusion. Cognitive capacity entirely intact, absolutely 0 signs of decline. Then he confidently called my witnesses up one by one. Michael passionately spoke about my long years working at AT&T, highlighting my sharp technical precision and my incredible organizational skills. Carol vividly described our daily social interactions, strongly emphasizing my absolute lucidity and total independence. 2 other highly trusted neighbors clearly testified about my normal daily life, categorically denying the ridiculous accusations of confusion or spatial disorientation. Finally, Mr. Miller proudly presented my meticulous financial records, effectively proving an utterly flawless management of my personal resources. He also proudly played the video I had recorded, where my total coherence and crystal mental clarity were plainly visible to everyone. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up very slowly and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I am 68 years old and I have worked incredibly hard my entire life. I raised my only son completely alone after suddenly losing my wonderful husband. He has never, ever lacked a single thing, neither a good education, nor endless love, nor strong financial support whenever he actually needed it. I now live very modestly off my retirement pension, which I manage with extreme care. I am certainly not rich, but I also do not need absolutely anyone to manage my money for me. The only thing I am asking for today is basic respect for my personal dignity and for my constitutional ability to make decisions regarding my own life. For just a brief instant, I looked directly over at David. Our eyes finally met, and, for the first time in a very long while, I actually saw something real in his gaze. Deep guilt, terrible shame. I was not exactly sure which, but he very quickly looked away. The judge took meticulous notes during the entire hearing, occasionally nodding his head. When absolutely everyone had finished speaking, he adjusted his reading glasses and spoke with a very grave voice. After thoroughly examining all the documentation submitted today and carefully listening to all the witnesses, this court strongly finds that there is absolutely no legal basis whatsoever to establish a guardianship. Mrs. Carter has clearly demonstrated full and total capacity to manage her own affairs. Case completely dismissed. He slammed his heavy wooden gavel down, and I felt exactly as if a massive boulder had been lifted completely off my tired shoulders. As we happily walked out of the courtroom, Carol hugged me incredibly tight. Mr. Miller was smiling with total satisfaction. Michael and the other wonderful witnesses warmly congratulated me on the big victory, but I simply could not take my eyes off David and Paige, who were quickly walking away down the long hallway without ever looking back. "Just let them go," Carol told me very softly. "Right now, the only important person is you." She was absolutely right, but even so, a huge part of my broken heart was still a grieving mother who could not possibly understand how we had ever reached this horrible point. The days immediately following the court hearing were strangely very peaceful. There were absolutely no angry phone calls from David, no nasty text messages, no attempts to contact me whatsoever, and in a certain way, it felt like an incredible relief, but it also deeply unsettled me. I knew my son far too well to believe that he would simply give up this easily. I was completely wrong to ever think that things would just calm down. Exactly 1 week after the court hearing, while I was buying groceries at the local farmers market, I noticed some very strange looks from a few of the local merchants. Mrs. Lawson, the nice lady who had been selling me fresh fruit for years, attended to me with an incredibly unusual coldness, and as I walked right past the fish counter, I clearly heard 2 women loudly whispering to each other. "That is her right there, the crazy lady who is losing her mind. Her poor son is totally desperate. The poor guy." I stood completely frozen, holding my heavy bag of oranges tightly in my hand. The burning humiliation rushed all through my body, just like a hot wave of fire. I desperately wanted to answer them back, to confront them right to their faces, but the right words just would not come out. I quickly paid for my things and walked right out of the market with my head held high but my heart completely crushed. The second I arrived back home, I received an urgent phone call from Isabel, an old coworker from AT&T who now worked at the local bank branch where I kept my account. "Mary, I really do not know how to tell you this," she began with a highly worried voice. "David has been down here, desperately trying to speak with the branch manager. He was loudly claiming that you are currently having severe mental issues and that he absolutely needs immediate access to your accounts to protect your financial interests. Luckily, Martin clearly remembered your previous visit and firmly told him that without a proper court order, he could not do absolutely anything." "Thank you so much for warning me, Isabel," I replied, desperately trying to control the awful trembling in my voice. "There is something else too, Mary." I actually overheard Paige talking very loudly on her cell phone over at the coffee shop right across the street from the bank. She was saying that if they did not get their hands on the money soon, they would lose the big house. She sounded incredibly desperate. So that was exactly what it was. David's absolute desperation was rapidly growing out of control. The huge house in Wellesley, that hollow symbol of high social status they had foolishly bought without being able to afford it, was now in serious danger, and I was still their one and only solution. That very afternoon, Carol came up to my apartment carrying a freshly baked pie and some highly disturbing news. The nasty rumors are rapidly spreading all over the neighborhood. Mary, people are saying that they have seen you loudly talking to yourself, that you totally forgot to pay your monthly rent, that you literally confused Mrs. Parker's young granddaughter with your very own granddaughter. Absolute nonsense. But people love to talk. And who exactly is spreading all these vicious lies? I asked, even though I already knew the horrible answer. Paige, mostly. She has somehow managed to become very good friends with the neighborhood hairdresser. You already know exactly how that works. One little word over here, another little word over there, and before you know it, the entire neighborhood is fully convinced. I poured myself a hot cup of coffee and sat down very heavily on the living room sofa. The constant daily stress was really starting to take a massive toll on my body. I noticed a very persistent, aching pain in my left temple, and my blood pressure, which was normally quite stable, was definitely starting to rise. I simply cannot keep living like this. Carol, every single day is a brand new, exhausting battle. Do you know what truly hurts me the absolute most? That these people actually believe that I am genuinely losing my mind. That they look right at an older woman and automatically assume that she is weak, totally confused, and completely incapable. Carol gently took my tired hands between hers. Her wise eyes, framed by beautiful wrinkles of life experience, looked at me with total determination. Then do not ever give them that sick satisfaction. Go right out there and show them exactly who you truly are. And so that is exactly what I did. The very next day, dressed in my absolute best outfit and with my hair freshly styled, I personally visited every single local merchant in the entire neighborhood. I spoke directly with the local baker, with the town pharmacist, with the owner of the convenience store. I proudly showed them the official medical report signed by Dr. Foster, and I told them the honest truth about the ugly situation right to their faces. My own son is desperately trying to steal my money, and to do so, he is actively spreading totally false rumors about my mental health. If you hear absolutely anything, now you already know the real truth. Some folks looked visibly uncomfortable, while others looked totally shocked. But the vast majority of them reacted with pure, righteous indignation upon finally learning the actual facts. Mr. Mitchell, the kind town pharmacist who had known me personally for 3 full decades, was particularly blunt about the situation. Mary, I have known you ever since the very first day I opened up this pharmacy. You come in here exactly once a month to get your blood pressure medication. You never, ever forget your prescriptions. You always know exactly what you need. If absolutely anyone ever dares to speak badly about you in my presence ever again, I will personally show them the door. The following Saturday, I hosted a lovely little gathering right inside my home. I warmly invited my friendly neighbors, my old coworkers, and my closest friends. I graciously offered them hot coffee, delicious homemade pastries, and above all else, the absolute truth. I proudly showed them my legal documents. I told them all about the nasty court hearings, about the vicious lies spun by David and Paige. I am absolutely not asking you to take sides, I explained to them. I just want you all to hear my side of the story directly from my own mouth and not through some nasty neighborhood gossip. It was an incredibly emotional afternoon. Many of them openly shared their very own painful stories of terrible family conflicts and offered me their total, unconditional support. Others openly admitted to having heard the vicious rumors and sincerely apologized to me for ever having believed them. Mrs. Parker, my lovely neighbor from the second floor, truly surprised me with her brutal honesty. I have to confess to you, Mary, that when I first heard what they were saying, I actually doubted you for a brief moment. It is always so incredibly easy to believe the absolute worst, especially when it comes to older folks. But then I quickly remembered how you immediately helped me when I fell down last year, how you beautifully organized all the neighbors to kindly bring me hot meals. That is certainly not the behavior of a confused person. As all the happy guests began to leave, I truly felt that something massive had finally shifted. I had successfully taken back total control of my own narrative. I was no longer the poor, totally confused old lady from Paige's vicious rumors, but Mary Carter, a highly respected woman in her own beloved community. That evening, when absolutely everyone had finally gone home, Carol stayed behind to help me tidy up the place. While we were busy washing the dirty dishes, she asked me a totally unexpected question. Have you ever thought about talking directly to David without any lawyers, without Paige, just mother and son? The sudden question caught me completely off guard. Talking directly to David after absolutely everything he had done to me, after all the vicious lies, the nasty manipulations, the cruel attempts to completely destroy my good reputation, I honestly do not know if I am fully ready for that. Carol, I genuinely do not know if I could even look him in the face without feeling this burning rage that is completely eating me up inside. Holding on to resentment is exactly like drinking deadly poison and patiently expecting the other person to die, Carol replied very softly. Just think about it. I am not telling you to instantly forgive him, just to simply talk to him. Perhaps there are certain things you still do not know, hidden explanations that you have not even heard yet. I slept very restlessly that night, constantly thinking about Carol's wise words. Should I actually try to talk to David? Was there really any possible explanation that could ever justify exactly what he had done to me? The ultimate answer arrived in the most totally unexpected way possible. The very next morning, while I was eating my breakfast out on the balcony, I saw a familiar car park right in front of the building. It was David, completely alone, without Paige. I watched him slowly step out of the car, hesitate for a brief moment, and finally walk straight toward the front entrance. I heard the loud doorbell ring, and I took a very deep breath before finally answering through the intercom. "Who is it?" "It is me, Mom, David. Can we please talk?" My heart was beating incredibly fast. A massive part of me wanted to outright refuse him, to stand entirely firm in my deep pain and burning indignation. But another part of me, the loving mother that I had never ever stopped being, desperately needed to understand. "Come on up," I answered very simply. I waited right by the front door, with my arms firmly crossed over my chest. When David finally appeared on the landing, his physical appearance truly shocked me. He had massive dark circles under his eyes, he had clearly lost a lot of weight, and his usual highly confident posture had totally vanished. He looked completely defeated. "Hello, Mom," he said softly, without even daring to look me directly in the eyes. "Hello, David. Come on in." I led him straight into the living room, offering him a seat on the very sofa where he had sat so many times as a little boy to watch his favorite cartoons. Now he looked totally out of place, incredibly uncomfortable in a space that was once his safe childhood home. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. I just really wanted to talk." I sat down directly across from him, keeping a very safe physical distance. The heavy silence stretched out for several long seconds, incredibly thick and heavily loaded with a million unexpressed emotions. "I am listening to you," I finally said. David took a very deep breath, nervously running his hands straight through his hair in an anxious gesture that I instantly recognized from his teenage years. "I have come here to beg for your forgiveness, Mom. I know it probably does not mean absolutely anything after everything I have done, but I desperately needed to tell you right to your face." I looked directly at him without saying a single word, actively expecting a lot more than just empty words. "Things with Paige are not going well at all," he continued speaking. "We have been fighting non-stop ever since the last court hearing. She wants to keep on trying, to find some other sneaky way to get her hands on the money, but I simply cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep doing this to you." "Why?" "David, exactly why did you ever go this far? I am your mother. I raised you all by myself. I gave you absolutely everything I possibly could. His voice totally cracked when he finally answered me. At first, it was strictly about the huge house. We had financially committed ourselves way beyond our actual means. Paige kept insisting that we absolutely had to maintain certain high-end appearances, that her snobby family expected a very specific standard of living. When we suddenly discovered that her parents were practically totally bankrupt, the intense pressure grew even worse. And you simply decided that the brilliant solution was to steal my retirement savings, to invent nasty lies that I was totally crazy. That is not exactly how it happened. At first, I only thought about asking you for some financial help, but then Paige cleverly suggested the whole honeymoon idea as a sneaky way to get you to hand over the cash voluntarily. When you flatly refused, things quickly spiraled totally out of control. Paige personally knows a lot of highly influential people. She has powerful contacts in the legal world. One bad thing led to another, and before I even realized what was happening, we were right in the middle of a full guardianship process. I listened to him in total silence, carefully processing every single word he said. A tiny part of me desperately wanted to believe him, to understand that he had been horribly manipulated, but another huge part of me, the part that had suffered terrible humiliations and endless anguish, could not possibly forget things so easily. And what happens now? David, exactly what do you expect from me? That I magically forgive you? That I just pretend like absolutely nothing ever happened? I do not expect anything at all, Mom. I just desperately wanted you to know that I am deeply sorry, that I am entirely ashamed of exactly what I have done, and that I am going to try and fix it. Fix it how? I am going to completely sell that stupid house. I have already spoken with a real estate agent. We will not recover absolutely everything we invested, but it will be more than enough to completely pay off the most urgent debts. And I have officially requested a job transfer to the New York office. I desperately need to get far away from Boston, from Paige, from this entire toxic situation. His final words truly surprised me. I definitely was not expecting such incredibly drastic decisions. And what about Paige, the big wedding? David let out a very bitter laugh. The wedding is completely canceled. When I finally told her that I would no longer go along with the nasty plan against you, she finally showed her true ugly colors. She flatly told me that without the big money, without the huge house, and without her high social status, she had absolutely no interest in staying with me. For a very brief instant, I actually felt a pang of pity for my son. Despite absolutely everything, he was still the little boy that I had lovingly raised, now facing the incredibly harsh consequences of his very own terrible mistakes. I am sorry, David. I am truly sorry that things had to end up exactly like this. No, Mom. I am the one who is deeply sorry. You did not do a single thing wrong. You only defended yourself. We sat there in total silence, with the incredibly heavy weight of everything that had happened floating right between us in the room. Finally, David slowly stood up on his feet. I really should be going now. I just desperately wanted you to hear the honest truth and to hear my sincere apology in person. I certainly do not expect you to forgive me right now. Maybe you never ever will. I will completely understand that. I walked him right to the front door, feeling a massive, swirling mix of totally contradictory emotions. Right before leaving, he looked me straight in the eyes for the very first time during the entire conversation. I love you, Mom. Despite absolutely everything, I have never, ever stopped loving you. When I finally closed the heavy front door behind him, the hot tears that I had desperately held back during the entire conversation finally flowed completely free. They were definitely not tears of deep sadness or total joy, but tears of pure liberation, exactly as if a tight knot that had been squeezing my heart for months finally began to slowly loosen up. David's unexpected visit had stirred up a lot of intense emotions, but I simply did not allow myself to drop my guard. Even though his apologies seemed completely sincere, far too much had happened between us for me to ever trust him blindly again. I wisely decided to maintain all my strict legal precautions and to closely follow Mr. Miller's solid advice to officially document absolutely everything and to be fully prepared for any brand new legal strategy. My deep caution proved to be completely justified just a week later. On a rainy October morning, I received an urgent phone call from Isabel, my trusted contact at the bank. "Mary, you need to come down here immediately," she told me with a highly urgent voice. "A brand new court order has just arrived. Your bank accounts have been temporarily frozen." "What?" "But that is entirely impossible. The judge completely dismissed the guardianship case. I have absolutely all the legal documents that prove it. This is not about the guardianship case. This is something entirely different. A temporary injunction due to severe financial risk against the family estate. I simply cannot give you any more details over the phone. Just get down here as fast as you possibly can." I hung up the phone feeling exactly like the solid floor was totally vanishing right beneath my feet. Another court order? After David's emotional visit and his tearful apologies, this made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I got dressed incredibly fast and, despite the heavy pouring rain, I walked straight to the bank with a highly determined pace. Isabel was patiently waiting for me right at her desk, wearing a deeply worried expression. Right on her desk was a formal legal document. "They have officially filed a brand new petition," she explained to me in a very low voice. "They are strongly arguing that your recent financial decisions put the entire family inheritance at severe risk. They specifically mentioned the large sum of money you were originally going to transfer for the honeymoon, boldly claiming that it was a highly impulsive and completely irrational decision and that you could easily do something similar with the rest of your life savings. But that is totally absurd. That money was mine, carefully saved up for many years. I have every right to spend it exactly however I want. I know that, Mary. But they have somehow managed to temporarily convince a totally different judge, a much younger one who just arrived at the courthouse. They have proudly presented fake witnesses who boldly claim that you have been making crazy comments about donating all of your money to random charities or blowing your entire life savings on a massive around-the-world cruise. I have never, ever said anything remotely like that. Of course you have not. But until this entire mess is fully cleared up, your bank accounts will remain strictly locked down. You will only be legally allowed to withdraw very small amounts for basic living expenses, and you will have to fully justify every single one of them. I walked right out of the bank with the terrible court order firmly in my hand and total indignation boiling hot in my chest. David had completely lied to me all over again. His emotional visit, his tearful apologies, they had only been a nasty, calculated strategy to lower my defenses while he secretly prepared this brand new vicious attack. I immediately called Mr. Miller, who urgently asked me to come straight to his office with absolutely all my legal documentation. When I finally arrived, I was totally shocked to find Michael, my old coworker from AT&T, sitting right there waiting for me. "Michael, exactly what are you doing here?" "I have some highly important information, Mary. Something you absolutely need to know." Mr. Miller motioned for us to sit down and Michael slowly began to speak. "I have a young nephew who currently works over at the Notary Public's office in the Judicial District. Just a few days ago, he personally saw Paige walking right in with a man who was definitely not David. They confidently presented several legal documents bearing your name, officially requesting certified copies of all your property deeds. But that is entirely impossible. I have not authorized absolutely anything like that." "Exactly." My clever nephew quickly realized that something was totally off, and he discreetly made secret copies of exactly what they presented. "Look here." Michael proudly spread several photocopies right across the desk. They were legal documents bearing my full name and a forged signature that clearly pretended to be mine, but which was very obviously fake. Formal authorizations, legal requests, and even a completely falsified power of attorney. "This is massive document fraud, Mr. Miller firmly stated, closely examining the fake papers with a very deep frown. "This is a highly serious felony. With all of this hard evidence, We can easily file a formal criminal complaint for both forgery and fraud. Do you honestly think David is fully involved in this? I asked, feeling a terrible mix of burning rage and deep sadness. Michael and Mr. Miller quickly exchanged knowing glances. I honestly do not know, Mary, Michael finally answered. The strange man who physically accompanied Paige was certainly not David. According to my smart nephew, he was much older, looking exactly like an expensive lawyer, but we simply cannot rule out that David is fully aware of it. On my quiet walk back home, my tired mind spun wildly trying to fit all the crazy pieces together. It was completely possible that Paige was acting entirely on her own, without David's direct knowledge. Or was this all just a tiny part of a much larger, highly elaborate evil plan? That very same night, I received a phone call from a totally unknown number. Upon answering, I instantly recognized David's voice. Mom, I literally just found out about what happened to your bank accounts. I swear to you that I had absolutely nothing to do with it. It is entirely Paige and her crazy father. They are completely desperate, Mom. His huge company is right on the edge of total bankruptcy, and they are desperately trying to liquidate any available assets however they possibly can. And am I simply an asset to be liquidated? David, I replied with pure bitterness. No, Mom. I absolutely did not mean it like that. I am just desperately trying to explain to you that they are acting out of total panic. They have actually forged legal documents. They have heavily bribed public officials. They are completely crossing every single line. And where exactly were you while all of this madness was happening? There was a very long silence on the other end of the line. I was totally terrified, Mom, he finally admitted. When I fully discovered exactly how far they were truly willing to go, I was totally afraid to confront them. Paige's crazy father has highly powerful connections, but I simply cannot keep looking the other way. That is exactly why I am calling you right now. I am going to testify. I am going to tell them absolutely everything. I desperately wanted to believe him. A huge part of me deeply yearned to finally get back the loving son I once knew, but I had been brutally deceived far too many times before. David, if you truly want to help me, come down to Mr. Miller's office tomorrow morning. Tell him absolutely everything you know with exact details. That would truly be a real first step. I will do it, Mom. I swear it to you. The very next morning, I patiently waited inside Mr. Miller's office right alongside Michael. The agreed-upon time arrived and passed by, with absolutely no sign of David. Exactly 30 minutes later, when I was completely losing all hope, the office door slowly opened. David walked right in, looking extremely pale and visibly nervous. I am so incredibly sorry for the delay. Paige strongly suspects something. She has been calling me non-stop. During the next 2 full hours, David spoke without stopping once. He bravely told us exactly how the whole nightmare had started. The huge house in Wellesley bought solely to impress Paige's snobby family, the massive debts piling up, the growing panic of his wealthy father-in-law as he watched his company slowly sink. He openly confessed his total participation in the very first guardianship attempt, but strongly insisted that the most recent nasty maneuvers had been carefully orchestrated by Paige and her father, entirely without his direct knowledge. When I came to beg for your forgiveness last week, I was being totally sincere. He firmly assured me, I genuinely want to walk entirely away from all of this, but it is not that easy. They are heavily pressuring me, aggressively threatening to completely ruin my professional career if I ever dare to expose them. Mr. Miller took highly detailed notes and finally spoke with a very serious tone. David, absolutely everything you have just told me constitutes several highly serious felonies, massive fraud, aggressive document forgery, and attempted grand theft. If you are truly willing to formally testify on the record, we can easily file a formal criminal complaint, which will highly likely lead to severe criminal charges against both Paige and her father. David turned even paler. Is there absolutely no other solution, something slightly less drastic and... The only other viable option, Michael suddenly intervened, is to cleverly use this highly sensitive information to pressure them, to firmly let them know that we have more than enough hard evidence for a criminal complaint, but to generously offer them a clean way out, that they permanently drop absolutely all legal actions against Mary. They must physically return every single forged document and sign a legally binding agreement to never ever bother her again. David actually seemed totally relieved by this alternate option. I really think they would accept that, especially if they know that I am fully willing to testify against them. Mr. Miller looked right over at me, leaving the absolute final decision strictly in my hands. I thought deeply about absolutely everything that had happened, about the terrible pain, the deep humiliation, the endless sleepless nights. One huge part of me desperately wanted cold justice, to make them finally pay dearly for what they had done, but another soft part of me just desperately wanted total peace, to finally get my normal life back and, perhaps, to somehow salvage some form of relationship with my son. Let us try the pressure strategy first. I finally decided. If that completely fails, then we will aggressively pursue the criminal charges. The next few days were incredibly intense. Mr. Miller carefully drafted a highly detailed legal document outlining absolutely all the hard evidence we had against Paige and her father, perfectly including the forged papers discovered by Michael's smart nephew. David, in an incredibly brave act that truly surprised me, voluntarily offered to hand-deliver it to them personally. Their official response arrived barely 48 hours later. Paige and her father totally accepted absolutely all of our strict conditions. They would permanently drop all the nasty legal actions, they would quickly return all the forged documents, and they would officially sign a binding agreement to never ever interfere in my personal affairs ever again. In return, we would totally refrain from filing any criminal charges. The exact day we all went down to the courthouse to formally finalize the legal agreement, I saw Paige for the very last time. She was standing right next to her father, a massively built man with a highly arrogant expression who right now just looked completely and utterly defeated. She looked straight at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but I honestly just felt deep pity for her. How much pain had his obsession with keeping up appearances caused by the time we left the courthouse? With my accounts finally unblocked and a legal settlement protecting me, I felt like I could breathe freely for the first time in months. "What will you do now?" Mr. Gibson asked me. "Live," I replied simply. "Live without fear, without having to constantly justify myself. That is all I want." Daniel, who had kept his distance throughout the entire process, approached me shyly. "Mom, I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am going to try to be a better person. The transfer to New York is confirmed. I will be leaving next week." I looked at him. This man who was my son and, at the same time, a complete stranger. Could we ever rebuild what we had lost? "I need time, Daniel. What happened cannot be forgotten in a single day, but you are my son. You always will be. Maybe, with time," he nodded, understanding what he could not express with words. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at Edward's photograph and felt that I could finally tell him some good news. "I think we have gotten through the worst of it, Edward. It has not been easy, but we made it. And for the first time in a long time, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without waking up with a start. The road to reconciliation would be long, but at least now there was a road. The peace that followed the judicial resolution was short-lived. A week later, while I was watering the plants on my balcony, I heard 3 soft knocks on the door, completely different from the previous ones. I opened it and found a face I had not seen in over 10 years. Ralph, an old friend from my days as a technician at the telephone company. "Ralph, what are you doing here?" I asked, surprised but happy to see a friendly face. "Mary, I need to talk to you. It is important." I invited him in and made coffee in the kitchen. After exchanging a few words about the good old days, Ralph got straight to the point. "I work at a legal agency now, and I saw some documents that gave me a really bad feeling. They are in your name, but they are not yours. They are forged papers, property inventories, asset transfers, and everything points to Daniel and Paige. I sat in silence, staring at the bottom of my mug. I knew it. Deep down, I always knew it. Are you sure, Ralph? I saw it with my own eyes, Mary. I even heard a guy from the notary's office say it was to speed up the guardianship process for the old lady who no longer knows what she is doing. That confirmation hit me like a bucket of ice-cold water. It was no longer speculation. It was proof that my own son was willing to forge documents to take what was mine. I walked him to the door and thanked him with a firm handshake. As soon as he left, I grabbed my blue folder and headed straight back to Mr. Gibson's office. He listened to me with a serious face and, without wasting any time, called a colleague at the prosecutor's office. This is straight-up fraud and document forgery now. We are filing a full criminal complaint. That night, sitting on my balcony once again, I felt that I was no longer alone. I had proof. I had a trusted lawyer. I had my dignity intact. And even though I knew the worst was yet to come, I also knew that this time they would not catch me off guard. The days following Ralph's visit were a mix of apparent calm and constant high alert. I woke up early, I made my coffee, I swept the patio, and I sat on the balcony just like always. But inside me, there was a silent, heavy tension. I knew Daniel and Paige would not stop. That silence after the complaint was too strange, too calculated. I did not have to wait long. One Friday morning, just as I was finishing watering the plants, I heard a sharp knock on the door. This time, it was not neighbors or debt collectors. It was two men in light suits wearing credentials hanging around their necks. "Mrs. Mary Carter?" one of them asked. "Yes, that is me. We are here to deliver an urgent court notice. You need to sign the receipt." They handed me a heavy, sealed envelope. It had an official stamp. I took it with steady hands, even though inside, my stomach was tied in knots. I signed the receipt and closed the door. I walked slowly to the kitchen table. I opened the envelope and began to read. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was an urgent court order, requesting the freezing of my house. The justification was absolutely absurd. Financial risk to the family estate, possible inability of the owner to manage her assets. It was exactly the same narrative Daniel and Paige had used, but this time there was a judge behind it. I sat for a long time with the document open on the table. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just took a deep breath and repeated to myself, "This is war." I did not waste any time. I grabbed the blue folder and walked to Mr. Gibson's office. When he saw me walk in with the envelope in my hand, he dropped what he was doing and met me in the waiting room. "Let's see, Mary. What happened now?" I handed him the notice. He read it calmly, but when he finished, he looked at me dead in the eye. "This is no longer a simple family dispute. Now we are talking about legal abuse, a blatant attempt at dispossession, and if they got this order, it is because they submitted forged documents. But do not worry. We will fight back." That same afternoon, we worked for hours. Mr. Gibson called a trusted doctor to renew my certificate of mental clarity. He also prepared a written opposition, attaching every single laminated document I had so carefully kept. The notarized affidavit, the fraud complaint, the previous medical certificate, everything. When I left the office, night was already falling. I walked slowly through the streets of Chicago, seeing the lights of the street vendors and hearing the distant music of a band playing in the square. And even though it hurt inside, I also felt strong. I was not going to let them take what was mine. The next day, I showed up at the courthouse accompanied by Mr. Gibson. We had all the documentation perfectly organized. The judge who had signed the freezing order was different from the one at the first hearing. He was a younger man, more rigid, with a hard gaze. "Your Honor," Mr. Gibson began, "we are here to present clear evidence that this precautionary measure is completely unfounded. Mrs. Mary Carter is in full mental capacity, as demonstrated by these medical and notarial certificates. Furthermore, there is an ongoing criminal complaint for document forgery in which the applicants, Daniel Carter and Paige Miller, are directly implicated." The judge took the documents and reviewed them one by one. He looked at me over his glasses and asked, "Mrs. Carter, are you aware of what is happening here?" I sat up straight in my chair, took a breath, and answered without hesitation. Of course I am, Your Honor. My son and his fiancée want to take what belongs to me, but I am still the same woman who worked for 40 years as a telecommunications technician. The one who climbed poles under the blazing hot sun and who never, ever missed a bill payment. And here is the proof that I am neither crazy nor incompetent. The courtroom fell silent for a few seconds. Daniel glared at me with pure rage. Paige had that cynical smile I knew all too well. The judge closed the file and said, "Very well, we will review this evidence and issue a ruling shortly." I left the courthouse with my heart racing, but with my head held high. I knew it would not be easy. Daniel and Paige had resources. They lied without any shame, and they did not care about dragging my name through the mud. But I also knew I was no longer the submissive woman I used to be. The following days were a waiting game. I continued with my routine. Although, with my money frozen, everything became much more complicated. I could not withdraw cash. I could not pay my bills normally. I had to resort to the small cash savings I kept hidden in a drawer. One afternoon, while I was at the neighborhood grocery store buying bread and milk, I heard two women whispering behind my back. They say Mary is not doing well anymore, that her son is taking over because she is blowing all her money on nonsense. Oh, how sad, right? A woman who worked her whole life, and now this. I did not turn around. I did not say a word. But those words pierced me like knives. The legal attack was not enough. Now they also wanted to kill me while I was still breathing, destroying my reputation in the community. That night, sitting on the balcony with the radio turned off, I thought about everything that had happened. Daniel's betrayal, Paige's humiliations, the lies in court, and I understood that I could not just stay on the defensive. I had to hit back with the truth, with evidence, with absolute firmness. I called Mr. Gibson and told him, "Mr. Gibson, I do not want to just defend myself anymore. I want to go on the offensive." He was quiet for a few seconds and then replied, "That is exactly what I was waiting for you to say, Mary. We are going to formally sue for identity theft, fraud, and emotional distress. This is no longer just defense. This is about justice." And so we did. The very next day, we filed the complaint with the prosecutor's office. We handed over copies of all the evidence, the forged signatures, the attempted bank fraud, the malicious rumors. Everything was recorded in official documents. As we walked out of the prosecutor's office, Mr. Gibson put a hand on my shoulder and said, "This will not be resolved in a day, Mary. But believe me, every document we are submitting is another brick in the wall stopping them, and sooner or later, that wall will be so high they will not be able to climb it." I slept a little better that night, not because the war was over, but because I finally felt I was not alone. There was a clear path. I was fighting on the right side. What I did not know was that Daniel and Paige, feeling backed into a corner, were preparing an even dirtier trick. Something that would not only affect me, but would jeopardize everything I had built in my life. My name, my house, my peace of mind. And that blow would come sooner than I imagined. The calm that followed our formal complaint was disturbingly brief. One morning in early November, while the autumn leaves were painting the streets in shades of ochre and yellow, I heard the doorbell ring. It was barely 8 o'clock, way too early for visitors. Through the peephole, I saw two official-looking men, one of them carrying a folder under his arm. I opened the door cautiously, already far too used to bad news. "Good morning. Mrs. Mary Carter?" the shorter one asked in a monotone voice. "Yes, that is me. Urgent court notice. We need you to sign right here." With hands that no longer trembled from surprise, but from sheer indignation, I signed the receipt. The envelope felt heavy, as if the paper was loaded not just with ink, but with malicious intent. In the solitude of my kitchen, I unfolded the contents. It was exactly what I feared, a preliminary order to freeze my house. The justification was as absurd as it was predictable: protection of the family estate against the risk of disposal by the owner. I sat down slowly, looking at the walls that had sheltered me for over 4 decades. This apartment in the historic district that Edward and I bought with so much effort when Daniel was barely crawling. Every single corner held memories. The mark on the wall where we measured Daniel's height every birthday. The small dent in the kitchen door from that time Edward tried to fix the plumbing himself. The balcony where we had watched the stars together so many nights. And now, my own son wanted to rip it away from me, as if I were a stranger, a lost old woman who needed to be protected from herself. I did not cry. But I felt a pain deeper than any physical injury I had ever experienced in my years as a telecom tech. Because losing money is tough, but having someone try to take your home, that is ripping your soul out. I took a deep breath, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and dialed Mr. Gibson's number. Mr. Gibson, I just received a preliminary freezing order on my house. On the other end of the line, I heard a brief silence followed by a tired sigh. Stay calm, Mary. That house has been registered in your name for decades. Nobody can touch it without your consent. We will stop this. That very afternoon, we met at his office. I showed him the documents, and he reviewed them patiently. Look, Mary, this is a very dirty trick, but it has zero legal foundation. They are trying to use any loophole to put pressure on you. We will respond with an immediate appeal. And on top of that, we are moving forward with the lawsuit for emotional distress right now. Because what they are doing is not just fraud. It is public humiliation. We spent the next few hours crafting our strategy. Mr. Gibson contacted a certified appraiser to verify the current value of the property and its ownership history. He also requested a detailed report from the property registry proving that I legally owned the apartment for over 40 years, long before Daniel was even born. The hearing is in 10 days, he explained to me. We have more than enough time to prepare properly. We will not let them take what is rightfully yours. The days that followed were incredibly tense. Some neighbors, misinformed by the vicious rumors Paige had spread, started looking at me with suspicion. One lady commented out loud as I was walking past the store, "How sad. So many years of hard work, and now she does not even know what she is doing." I did not stop to answer, but those words hurt me like very few things in my life ever had, because it was no longer just my son turning his back on me. Now it was the neighborhood itself, the people who had watched me grow, work, and age. One night, as I was rocking in my chair with the radio off, a memory of Edward came to my mind. He used to tell me, "Mary, respect is not begged for. It is earned every single day, and when someone tries to take it away from you, you have to fight for it tooth and nail." That phrase stuck in my head, and I decided that was exactly what I was going to do. The next day, Mr. Gibson accompanied me to the courthouse to file the formal opposition to the freeze. We brought the original deed to the house, the up-to-date property tax payments, and solid proof that I had lived there for 40 years. The judge took the folder, reviewed it, and set a hearing for 1 week later. That week was the longest of my entire life. Daniel did not call, neither did Paige. The silence was absolute, but it was a heavy silence, like a massive storm brewing on the horizon. I stuck to my routine, waking up early, watering the plants, cooking a pot roast. But every time I looked at the walls of my home, I felt a mix of intense pride and deep fear. Pride because I knew what it had cost me to build it. Fear because my own flesh and blood wanted to tear it away from me. On the day of the hearing, we arrived at the courthouse early. I wore my freshly ironed blue blouse, the exact same one I wore to the very first hearing. Mr. Gibson was right beside me with his briefcase completely full of documents. When we walked into the courtroom, there they were again, Daniel and Paige, her with that haughty smile, him completely avoiding my eyes. The judge opened the session with a dry voice. "We are here to review the request for a precautionary freeze on the property located at..." He read my full home address. I felt a chill run down my spine. Daniel's lawyer took the floor with a very theatrical tone. He claimed that I was no longer in any condition to manage my assets, that my estate was at severe risk, and that the family simply wanted to protect it. He presented copies of forged documents, contracts I never signed, and even testimonies from supposed acquaintances who claimed to have seen me wandering the streets looking lost. When it was our turn, Mr. Gibson stood up calmly, opened his folder, and presented every single real document. The original deed, the property tax receipts, the notarial records, everything was in perfect order. "Flawless, Your Honor," he said with a firm, steady voice. "This attempted freeze has absolutely no basis. Here is the concrete proof that Mrs. Mary Carter is the legitimate, fully conscious, and capable owner of her property. Furthermore, there is already a formal criminal complaint filed against Daniel Carter and Paige Miller for document forgery. What they are trying to do here is not protect her, it is to rob her." The judge listened in total silence, reviewed the papers, and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Carter, do you have anything you would like to add?" I stood up. My voice was trembling, but I was completely firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I built that house with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, working out in the sun and the rain. I raised my son there. I took care of my husband there until the very last day of his life. And now, that exact same son wants to take it away from me. I will not allow it." The courtroom went dead silent. Daniel looked down at the floor. Paige pressed her lips tightly together. The judge let out a sigh and said, "Very well. The court will take all this evidence into consideration and will issue a ruling in the coming days." We walked out of that room with our hearts in our throats. There was no immediate ruling, but we knew the evidence was entirely on our side. That afternoon, back at home, I sat in my rocking chair and looked up at the tin roof I still kept from the very first room I ever built. I felt proud for not giving up, proud for defending what was mine. But I also knew Daniel and Paige would not just stop. Every single defeat would only make them more dangerous and much dirtier. And what came next proved it. Because if they had previously tried to smear my name in the neighborhood and steal my house, now they were going to try to destroy the only thing that was still holding me together. My dignity as a woman and as a mother. And that attack would be the lowest blow of them all. 3 days after the hearing about the house, I got a completely unexpected phone call. It was Carol, my neighbor and closest confidant during this whole nightmare. "Mary, I just found out something terrible. Daniel and Paige have filed a complaint against you for family abandonment and emotional abuse. They are claiming you were an absent mother, that you neglected him when he was little, and that you forced him to work since he was a child." I felt all the air completely leave my lungs. Abandonment? Abuse? Me? The woman who had given absolutely everything for my son? The one who had sacrificed my health, my money, and my best working years? That is impossible, Carol. I was always there for him. Even when he got appendicitis at 9 years old, I spent 3 straight weeks sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair because I refused to leave him alone. I know, Mary. Everyone who actually knows you knows that, but they are looking for absolutely any argument to discredit you. They want to make the judge believe that you were always a terrible mother and that you are lying about everything else right now. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. This accusation was different. The previous ones were after my money and my house. This one was trying to destroy my memory as a mother, my legacy, my deepest core identity. I could not sleep at all that night. I tossed and turned in bed, remembering all those moments with Daniel. His first day of school, when I held his little hand and bought him a brand new notebook even though I could barely afford it. The late nights studying math together because it was never his strongest subject. The Sundays at the city park, chasing after the pigeons. The modest but incredibly happy vacations down by the lake where I taught him how to swim. How could he possibly accuse me of abandonment now? Of abuse? It was the cruelest, lowest, most painful blow I could ever imagine. The next morning, looking visibly exhausted but fiercely determined, I went straight to Mr. Gibson's office. I told him everything with a broken voice. "This is the last straw, Mary," he said, clearly outraged. "They have crossed every single line. But do not worry. We have plenty of ways to prove that you were an exemplary mother. Paid school receipts, neighbors who saw you guys grow up together, family photos. We will not let them drag your name through the mud like this." Over the next few days, we gathered evidence. Old photographs showing us looking genuinely happy together. school report cards where his teachers praised my deep dedication as a single working mother, testimonies from neighbors who had watched Daniel grow up directly under my care. Carol offered to testify that she had seen me wake up every single day at 5 in the morning to make Daniel breakfast before I went off to work. Mike recalled how I used to swap shifts at the telephone company just so I could attend the parent-teacher meetings. On the day of the hearing for this new, sickening accusation, I dressed with special care. I carried a framed photograph in my purse. It was Daniel at 7 years old, smiling with a missing front tooth, hugging me tight on his birthday. It was my lucky charm, my reminder that, despite absolutely everything, there was a time when we were truly happy. The courtroom felt much colder than on previous occasions. Or maybe it was just me, feeling an internal freeze that no heavy coat could ever fix. Daniel and Paige were there, wearing very grim expressions. This time, for the very first time, Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable, as if, even for him, this specific lie was going way too far. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, painting a totally distorted picture of our family life. According to him, I had been a cold, completely absent mother who cared way more about my job than my own child. He mentioned alleged episodes of emotional neglect and psychological abandonment, technical terms that sounded heavy but were completely devoid of any reality. As I listened to him, I felt a kind of rage I had never experienced before. It was not a destructive anger. It was a deep, almost sacred indignation, the righteous anger of a mother whose pure love is being questioned. When our turn came, Mr. Gibson methodically presented every single piece of proof. Photographs, testimonies, receipts, everything perfectly documented and organized chronologically. Carol spoke with a clear, firm voice about my endless dedication as a mother. Mike testified about how I always had Daniel on my mind, even during the toughest shifts at work. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up slowly, holding the framed photograph in my hands. Your Honor, this is a picture of my son on his 7th birthday. He had just lost a tooth, and he was so incredibly proud. I baked him a chocolate cake myself. Even though I had worked a double shift that day just to be able to afford the bicycle he wanted so badly, being a single mother was never easy, but every single sacrifice was worth it just to see his smile. I looked directly at Daniel while I was speaking. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw something flash in his regret, deep shame. I was not entirely sure, but he quickly looked away. I have made mistakes, just like every parent. Maybe I worked way too much. Maybe I was a bit too strict sometimes. But I never, ever abandoned my son. Every single decision I ever made was with his well-being in mind. The judge listened intently, nodding occasionally. When we were all finished, he spoke with a very grave tone. After examining the evidence and hearing the testimonies, this court finds that the accusation of family abandonment and psychological abuse is completely and utterly without merit. On the contrary, the evidence clearly shows a deeply dedicated mother who did absolutely everything she could for her son under very difficult circumstances. He paused for a moment and continued with a much harsher tone. Furthermore, this court believes that these baseless accusations could constitute slander, and I am referring this case to the prosecutor's office for a potential criminal investigation. Daniel went completely pale. Paige, for the very first time, completely lost her smug expression of superiority and looked genuinely panicked. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a very strange mix of emotions. On one hand, the massive relief of victory, the absolute vindication of my name as a mother. On the other hand, a profound, heavy sadness for having to defend my maternal love in front of a judge, in front of total strangers, against vicious lies from my own flesh and blood. Carol hugged me extremely tight. You did it, Mary. Nobody can ever doubt that you were a wonderful mother. Did I really do it, Carol? I replied softly. My own son accused me of abandoning him. Even if the judge does not believe it, the damage is already done. Some wounds just do not heal easily. That afternoon, as I was walking back home under a sky that looked like it was about to pour rain, I saw Daniel waiting on the corner. He was totally alone. No Paige, no sleazy lawyer, just my son, looking completely defeated and much older than I remembered. "Mom," he said as I got closer, "can we talk?" Just for a minute. A huge part of me wanted to say no, to keep walking, to protect myself from any more pain. But another part of me, the part that would never stop being a mother, made me stop in my tracks. 5 minutes, Daniel. And that is all I can give you right now. We sat down on a bench in the small park nearby. For a moment, neither of us said a word. The gray, heavy November sky seemed to perfectly reflect the state of our hearts. "I am so sorry, Mom," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything, especially for today. It was not my idea, I swear to you. It was Paige and her dad. They were absolutely desperate after they lost the house freeze. They said it was our very last option. And you went along with it? You allowed them to accuse me of being a terrible mother? Of abandoning you?" He lowered his head, completely unable to meet my eyes. "I was terrified, Mom. Paige's dad, he has connections. He knows important people. He threatened to ruin my entire career, to make sure I never found a job in this city again. And then there is the massive debt on the house, the heavy loans we took out. There is always an excuse, Daniel, always a justification. But at the end of the day, you made a choice. You actively decided to betray the person who gave you life, the woman who sacrificed everything for you." The first heavy drops of rain started to fall, but neither of us made a move to find shelter. "I know, Mom, and there is no valid excuse. I do not expect you to forgive me right now. Maybe you never will. I just wanted you to know that today, in that courtroom, when I saw you hold up that picture from my 7th birthday, I remembered everything. How you worked double shifts just to buy me presents. How you helped me with my homework, even when you were dead on your feet. How you always made time to listen to my problems, no matter how small they were." His tears were fully mixing with the rain pouring down his face. "I let Paige brainwash me into thinking my childhood was rough, that I deserved so much more, that you somehow owed me. But today I remembered the actual truth. I had a great mother, an extraordinary mother, and I betrayed her in the worst possible way. I felt my own face getting totally wet. I did not know if it was the rain or the tears I could no longer hold back. What do you want from me, Daniel? Forgiveness? Absolution? I cannot give you that. Not right now. You have caused way too much damage. I do not want anything, Mom. I just wanted you to know that I am truly sorry, that I am going to drop every single lawsuit, every single accusation, that I am going to confess the whole truth about the forged papers, about everything. And then I am leaving the city. Like I told you before, I need to start over, far away from Paige, far away from all this toxic insanity I let drag me down. The rain was coming down much harder now, soaking both of us to the bone, but neither of us made any effort to move. I do not know if we can ever repair what has been broken between us, Daniel. There are certain wounds that leave permanent scars. I know, Mom, and I accept that. I just hope that someday, when you think of me, it is not just filled with pain. He stood up very slowly, as if every single movement cost him a massive amount of energy. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy he used to be, vulnerable and needing protection. But that boy had grown up. He had made his own adult choices, and now he had to face the brutal consequences. Goodbye, Mom. I love you, even though I do not deserve to. I watched him walk away in the pouring rain, with his shoulders slumped and a slow, heavy pace. A huge part of me wanted to call out his name, to stop him, to hug him just like when he was a little boy terrified of thunderstorms. But another part of me, the part that had finally learned to protect and value herself, kept me completely silent. I walked back home soaking wet, but carrying a very strange sense of peace, as if a massive, crushing weight had finally, very slowly, started to lift off my shoulders. The days following my encounter with Daniel passed in a very strange silence. There were no more court notices, No aggressive phone calls, no attempts at contact. Part of me seriously wondered if he would actually keep his word and drop the lawsuits, or if this was just another sick tactic to make me lower my guard. Carol came upstairs every single afternoon to drink coffee with me and bring me the latest neighborhood news. Little by little, the actual truth had been pushing through the vicious rumors. The people who genuinely knew me, who had witnessed my daily life for decades, started actively defending my name whenever someone repeated Paige's lies. Mrs. Higgins totally shut up the hairdresser yesterday, Carol told me with a look of pure satisfaction. She told her she had met very few women as sharp and dignified as Mary Carter, and that she should be deeply ashamed of herself for repeating baseless gossip. She stood up for you like a lion. These small gestures of community solidarity brought me immense comfort. But deep down, the main wound was still wide open. It was not just the attempt to steal my life savings or my house. It was the fundamental, core betrayal, the shattering of the most sacred trust that exists between a mother and her child. A week after the final hearing, I got a call from Mr. Gibson. "Mary, I have some major news. Daniel has officially withdrawn every single lawsuit and legal request against you. On top of that, he submitted a formal statement admitting that the accusations were entirely false and that he acted under severe pressure." I felt a massive lump form in my throat. Did he mention Paige? Not directly, but he made it very clear that third parties were heavily involved in the document forgery. The prosecutor's office is launching a full investigation. And what does this mean for me? Is it finally over? In legal terms? Yes. Your bank accounts will be completely unblocked immediately. The freeze order is officially canceled. Legally speaking, Mary, you are a free woman again. Legally free. Words that should have filled me with pure joy, but instead, they only highlighted the incredibly bitter truth that I had needed to legally defend my life against my own son. That I had to fight a brutal war just to keep what was rightfully mine. "There is one more thing, Mary," Mr. Gibson continued. "Daniel sold the house in the upscale suburbs, and from what I was told, he accepted the job transfer to New York. He is leaving next week." After I hung up the phone, I sat out on my balcony, watching the sun slowly set behind the Chicago skyline. One part of me felt intense relief. The legal nightmare was officially over. Another part of me felt a deep, crushing sadness. My only child was moving far away, maybe forever, leaving behind a massive trail of pain and broken trust. Carol, who had come up for our usual afternoon coffee, watched me in silence. "What are you thinking about, Mary?" she finally asked. "I am thinking about how you rebuild something that has been broken so deeply, if it is even possible. Time heals a lot of wounds, my friend. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I do not know if this wound can ever heal, Carol. It is not like losing money or even a house. It is losing total faith in someone who is literally a part of you." Carol took my hand in hers, her warm fingers pressing against my cold skin. "Forgiveness is not a single event, Mary. It is a long process. It does not happen overnight. Sometimes it takes years, even decades. And it does not mean forgetting what happened or excusing the inexcusable. It just means freeing yourself from the heavy burden of resentment." Her words resonated deep inside me, planting a tiny seed that maybe, just maybe, someday it could grow in fertile soil. That night, alone in the quiet of my bedroom, I pulled out the old family photo album I kept hidden under the bed. I slowly flipped through the pages, running my fingers over the images that captured moments of pure happiness. Edward and I on our wedding day, looking so young and full of hope. Newborn Daniel wrapped in my arms, so tiny and fragile. The three of us at the beach, building big sandcastles. Daniel at his high school graduation, looking so proud holding his diploma. Where had that family gone? At what exact moment did we lose our way so badly? The next day, while I was watering the flowers on my balcony, I saw a familiar car park right in front of the building. It was Daniel. He was completely alone again. For a brief second, I thought about going inside, about just ignoring the doorbell if he rang. But something in his posture, in the careful, heavy way he closed his car door, made me stop. The doorbell rang a few minutes later. "Who is it?" "It is me, Mom, Daniel. I have something to give you." I hesitated for a few long seconds before answering. "Come on up." I waited right by the door, completely torn by mixed feelings. When he appeared in the hallway, I noticed he was carrying a folder and a small box. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "I do not want to bother you. I just came to drop this off." He handed me the folder first. Inside were all the official documents, the formal withdrawal of all the lawsuits, the cancellation of the house freeze, the absolute unblocking of my bank accounts, everything properly signed and officially stamped. "Mr. Gibson already told me," I said, trying extremely hard to keep a neutral tone. "I know, but I wanted to bring it to you personally, so you know it is real, that it is finally over." I nodded quietly. Then he offered me the small box. "This is also for you." I opened it very carefully. Inside was an old key and a handwritten note. The key looked ancient, slightly rusted by the passage of time. "What is this?" "It is the key to Dad's old storage unit. Remember, we could never find it after he passed away? I found it years ago, while I was looking for some tools. I kept it, thinking I would give it to you. But then everything just got so complicated." I took the key, feeling its heavy weight right in the palm of my hand. Edward had kept a small storage unit down in the basement of the building where he kept all his tools and unfinished little projects. After he died, we could never locate the key and eventually just stopped looking for it, assuming it was gone forever. And the note? "Read it, please." I unfolded the paper, instantly recognizing my late husband's handwriting. "My dearest Mary, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer physically with you. But I want you to know that a huge part of me will always stay right by your side. I keep a lot more than just tools in this storage room. I keep memories, dreams, plans for a beautiful future I probably will not get to see. But above all, I keep my endless love for you and for Daniel. Take care of our boy, Mary. And always remind him that the true value of a man is not found in what he owns, but in exactly how he treats the people he loves. I will love you forever, Edward." Tears completely blurred my vision. The note, written so long ago by a man who fully knew his time was running out, now echoed with an incredibly painful irony. "I found it right next to the key," Daniel explained softly. "I never had the guts to give it to you. I think, deep down, I knew I was not living up to the core values Dad wanted for me." I looked at him, desperately trying to see past the cruel man who had betrayed me, searching for the little boy I had once loved unconditionally. "I am moving to New York tomorrow, Mom." The transfer got bumped up. "But before I left, I wanted to return what is yours and beg for your forgiveness one last time, not just as a formality, but because I am truly, deeply sorry from the absolute bottom of my heart." He turned around to leave, but right before he reached the door, he added, "I have been going to therapy, Mom. For the past few weeks, I have been trying to figure out how I could possibly let things get this far. How I could betray the person who has loved me the most." I had absolutely no idea what to say. Words felt completely useless to express everything I was feeling inside. The deep pain, the heavy distrust, but also a tiny, faint spark of hope, as delicate as the very first light of dawn. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." That was all I could manage to say. When he finally left, I walked down to the basement of the building, gripping Edward's key tightly in my hand. The storage room, dusty and totally forgotten, remained exactly as he had left it 15 years ago. Tools carefully organized on the wall, half-finished woodworking projects, boxes labeled with his neat handwriting, and right in the corner, a box with my name on it. Inside, there were letters he never got the chance to mail me, small, beautiful gifts he was planning to give me on special occasions, and a private diary where he had written down his deepest thoughts during the final months of his life. I flipped through the diary with trembling hands, finding pages completely filled with love, with deep concern for our future, with the beautiful hope that Daniel would grow up to become a good, decent man, a man just like his father. "Oh, Edward," I whispered into the dim light of the storage room. "What would you say if you saw what our son has turned into? If you saw everything that has happened?" But right in the middle of my pain, I remembered something Edward used to say all the time. "Mistakes do not define a person, Mary. It is what they do after making them that truly matters." Was Daniel honestly trying to fix his horrible mistakes? Was his regret totally genuine, or was it just another sick manipulation? With all these heavy questions spinning in my head, I walked back up to my apartment. Edward's old note and the rusty storage key had opened not just a physical door, but a massive emotional door that I had kept tightly locked for way too long. That night, while I looked up at the stars from my balcony, I felt a very familiar presence, as if Edward was standing right there beside me, whispering directly into my ear, "Forgiveness is not weakness, Mary. It is your greatest strength." Daniel leaving for New York marked the start of a very strange chapter in my life. On one hand, the massive relief that the brutal legal nightmare was over. On the other hand, the heavy emptiness of not knowing if I would ever have a real relationship with my only child again. Weeks passed, and my daily routine gradually came back. My bank accounts were totally unblocked, letting me finally access my modest life savings again. The nasty rumors around the neighborhood completely faded away, replaced by warm smiles, and in some cases, deep apologies from people who had bought into the lies. Carol remained my absolute rock, coming upstairs every afternoon to share a cup of coffee and a good chat. Mike and other old buddies from the telephone company regularly invited me out for lunches and small get-togethers, as if they were trying to make up for the dark times simply by being there. A month after Daniel moved, I got a letter from him. Not a quick text message or an email, but a handwritten letter, just like the ones Edward used to send me when we were dating. I opened it with a mix of sharp curiosity and heavy anxiety, having no idea what to expect. "Dear Mom, I hope this letter finds you well. New York is very different, colder and much more anonymous than Chicago, but maybe that is exactly what I need right now. Anonymity. The chance to redefine myself far away from my past mistakes. I have kept going to therapy. It is hard. It is really painful sometimes to face ugly truths about myself that I would much rather ignore. But it is also incredibly freeing. I am finally starting to understand exactly how I ended up doing what I did. Even though understanding it does not excuse it for a second. Paige and I broke up for good. I am guessing you already figured that out. After I dropped all the lawsuits and confessed the truth, she called me to say I was a massive coward and told me to never contact her again. I have not. I do not think she ever actually loved me. She just loved what I represented for her selfish plans. Work here is going well. It is a fresh start. I live in a tiny apartment. Nothing flashy like that house in the Hamptons that we never should have bought in the first place. I am learning to live with a lot less, to truly value what actually matters. But the most important thing, Mom, is that I want you to know I think about you every single day, that I deeply regret the massive amount of pain I caused you, and that I would give absolutely anything to go back in time and do things differently. I do not expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I am trying my hardest to be better, to be the man Dad would have wanted me to be the son you actually deserve. Love, Daniel. I read the letter multiple times, aggressively searching between the lines for any hint of manipulation or lies, but everything sounded completely authentic, vulnerable, deeply sincere. It was the voice of the Daniel I raised, not the voice of the greedy stranger he had turned into while under Paige's toxic influence. I did not reply right away. I needed time. I needed space to process my heavy feelings, to decide if I was actually ready to crack that door open again. Over the next few weeks, I received more letters. They never demanded a reply. They never demanded immediate forgiveness. They simply shared bits of his new life, his deep reflections, his progress in therapy, his fond childhood memories. It felt like Daniel was slowly building a bridge, brick by brick, without being pushy, fully respecting my space and my deep pain. 3 months after he left, I finally decided to write back. A very short, cautious letter, but not entirely lacking affection. Daniel, I have received your letters. Thank you for sharing your progress with me. I cannot say the pain has totally vanished, but I am on my own personal path to healing. I have been going down to your father's storage unit. I found a lot of things I had no idea he kept. Old letters, photographs, half-finished projects. Among them, a little wooden cart he was building for you, but never got to finish. Carol asks about you all the time. I told her you are doing well, adapting to New York. I am glad to hear work is going good and that you are sticking with therapy. That is a huge step. Take care of yourself, Mom. And that is exactly how our brand new relationship began. Through letters crossing the massive distance between Chicago and New York. They were never overly gushy or wildly emotional. They were honest, measured, and deeply respectful of the space and time we both so desperately needed to heal. 6 months after he moved away, Daniel asked me in a letter if he could come visit me. Not to stay over, just to grab a cup of coffee. To talk face-to-face for the very first time since that rainy afternoon in the park. I checked in with Carol, who had basically become my unofficial therapist and closest confidant. I think you are ready, Mary, she told me with her usual sharp wisdom. You have had plenty of time to process things, to set your boundaries like solid steel, and he really seems to have done some genuine soul-searching. Maybe it is time to take a tiny step forward. We agreed on a date, a Sunday in early spring, when Chicago bursts into bright colors and fresh scents, as if the city itself was celebrating its rebirth after a brutal winter. I waited for him to arrive with a heavy mix of nerves and anticipation. I had brewed fresh coffee and bought some pastries from the bakery down the street, the exact ones he loved since he was a little boy. Small, simple gestures that did not mean complete forgiveness, but definitely showed I was willing to talk. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. When I opened the door, I was totally shocked by how different Daniel looked. He had lost weight, his hair was cut much shorter, and his eyes looked clearer, much more at peace. He was holding a beautiful bouquet of daisies, my absolute favorite flowers, the exact same ones Edward used to bring me for every single anniversary. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, handing me the bright flowers. "Thank you so much for having me." I invited him inside, watching closely as he looked around the apartment with fresh eyes, rediscovering the very space where he grew up. He stopped right in front of a framed picture of the three of us. Edward, him, and me. At the city park. "I remember that day," he said, sounding incredibly nostalgic. "Dad taught me how to fly a kite. We ended up getting it totally stuck in a huge tree, and we all just laid back on the grass, laughing our heads off. You were only 8 years old," I replied, honestly, surprised he remembered that specific day so vividly. "Edward stayed up all night, building you a brand new one, much bigger and way more colorful. And we sat down at the kitchen table, that same old table where we had shared so many simple family dinners, so many long talks, so many everyday moments that now felt incredibly precious in their pure simplicity. The conversation flowed, very cautiously at first, but then it grew more relaxed. We talked all about New York, his new job, his intensive therapy. He told me he had met someone, a girl from work named Emily, but they were taking it extremely slow, focusing on building a rock-solid friendship before jumping into anything else. I have learned not to rush things, to actually value substance over flashy appearances, he explained. Emily is totally different from Paige in every possible way. She is completely real. She works incredibly hard. She values the simple things in life. Eventually, the conversation inevitably turned toward what had happened. We could not just dodge it forever. It was a massive elephant sitting right in the room. "There is not a single day that goes by where I do not deeply regret it, Mom," he said, looking me straight in the eyes. "Not just because of the ugly legal mess, but because I made you doubt my love, my respect for you." Why, Daniel? That is the one question that keeps spinning around in my head. How did we ever reach that horrible point? He let out a very deep sigh, as if he was gathering the strength for a brutal confession. "It was a lot of things, Mom. The deep insecurity I always carried about our social status, the intense teenage shame I apparently never outgrew, the crazy, blinding ambition I built up to compensate for it, and then Paige, who knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly which deep insecurities to exploit. But you were a grown adult, Daniel, fully capable of making your own choices. I know, and that is the absolute hardest part for me to swallow, that I actively let it happen. That at every single step of the way, I had a choice. And I kept making the wrong one. Therapy has really helped me see that. As much as I want to blame Paige or the situation, the ultimate responsibility falls entirely on my shoulders. His pure honesty really moved me. He was not fishing for cheap excuses. He was not trying to minimize his toxic role in any of it. He was stepping up and taking full responsibility. Like a grown man. Like the exact man Edward would have wanted him to be. You know what my therapist told me? That sometimes we think we are reacting to what is happening right in front of us, when we are actually reacting to very old wounds, to toxic patterns we picked up when we were kids. It helped me realize how my deep insecurity about not having money, my desperate need for people's approval, made me the perfect target for someone exactly like Paige. Someone who promised this whole fake world of prestige and high social standing. As I listened to him talk, I instantly remembered little Daniel, so incredibly anxious to fit in, so painfully aware that we were completely different from the wealthy families of his classmates. I remembered how he used to cringe with shame when I picked him up wearing my dirty telecom uniform, how badly he craved those expensive brand-name sneakers we could never, ever afford. How he used to make up wild stories about fancy family vacations we obviously never took. I always tried to give you the absolute best I could, Daniel. I know, Mom. And it was never, ever lacking. The problem was not you. It was me. My total inability to value what we actually had, to see the massive wealth in our simple, love-filled life. By the time we finished our coffee, it was practically dark outside. We had been talking for hours straight, digging up old memories, sharing completely new perspectives, slowly but surely building a brand new mutual understanding. Right before he left, Daniel pulled a thick envelope out of his jacket pocket. "I wanted to give you this, Mom. It is not a lot, but it is a start." Inside was a cashier's check for a very significant amount of money, pretty much matching what he had supposedly saved up for his fancy honeymoon. "I cannot give you your time back, or erase the horrible pain I caused you, but I can start fixing the financial damage. I will send you whatever I can every single month. It is not a payoff. It is just proof that I am fully committed to making things right." I did not know what to say. The cash itself was not what mattered. It was what the cash actually symbolized: true remorse, a real desire to fix things, absolute accountability. "Thank you, Daniel. It is really not necessary, but I accept it for exactly what it is, a symbol of your true intentions." I walked him to the front door. Before stepping out, he looked at me with eyes completely full of held-back emotion. "Do you think you will ever be able to fully forgive me someday, Mom?" I thought about my answer very carefully, wanting to be totally honest, but not cruel. Forgiveness is not a final destination, Daniel. It is a long road we are walking on, and today we took a very big step. He nodded, deeply understanding the gravity of my words. It was not a flat rejection, but it was not an instant free pass either. It was an open invitation to keep doing the hard work, to keep building, to heal together. "I love you, Mom. Despite absolutely everything, I never stopped loving you." "I love you too, Daniel. Even in the absolute darkest moments, I never stopped either." I watched him walk down the street, not with the slumped, heavy shoulders of a totally defeated man, but standing tall, like someone who has finally started making peace, not just with the people around him, but with his own soul. That night, sitting out on my balcony under the bright Chicago stars, I felt genuine, pure peace for the first time in months. It was not the final chapter of our story. It was not even the end of our deep pain, but it was a brand new beginning, very fragile, but totally full of hope. And right in that exact moment, I could practically feel Edward's warm presence right next to me, his heavy hand resting right on my shoulder, his soft voice whispering, "You are doing a great job, Mary. You both are doing a great job." 1 whole year after that spring afternoon with Daniel, my life had taken a turn I never, ever could have imagined. With my bank accounts completely unblocked and my life savings restored, padded by the monthly checks from Daniel, who kept his word religiously, I decided to do something I had always dreamed of but never actually dared to do: travel. They were not crazy, luxurious trips or wild, exotic destinations. I started with Hawaii, then New York, where I stayed at Daniel's place for a full week, then London, Paris, and Rome. Wonderful little getaways that let me finally discover that the world was so much bigger and more diverse than the endless grind of work and sacrifice I had known my whole life. From every single place, I mailed postcards to Carol, to Mike, and of course, to Daniel. Pictures of historic town squares, of gorgeous sunsets over totally different oceans, of classic local dishes I tried with an insatiable hunger for life. On every single one, I wrote the exact same simple sentence: finally living, and I truly was living. At 69 years old, I was experiencing a level of total freedom I had never felt before. The beautiful freedom to make my own choices, to explore, to take fun risks without ever having to justify myself to a single soul. But it was not all just vacations and sightseeing. I also found a brand new way to give back to my community. Through the local community center, I started giving educational talks on financial protection for seniors. I shared my brutal personal experience. I explained the massive red flags, the legal tools available to them, and exactly how to protect themselves from fraud and financial abuse. If my story can help just one single person avoid going through the living hell I went through, then telling it is 100% worth it, I would tell the crowd. Mostly women around my age or older. A lot of them widows just like me. Prime targets for manipulation by greedy family members or totally ruthless strangers. These talks gave me an incredible new sense of purpose, a way to turn my massive trauma into something actually useful, to forge my horrible experience into a heavy shield of prevention and true empowerment for others. My relationship with Daniel slowly kept evolving. The letters eventually turned into weekly phone calls, and those turned into occasional weekend visits. He would fly into Chicago about once a month, and I would stop by New York whenever my new travel adventures brought me through the East Coast. I finally met Emily, the girl from work he had mentioned. She was a very simple but incredibly smart and warm woman. She treated Daniel with true, genuine respect, and she treated me with a level of deep consideration I had never once felt from Paige. It was not fake sucking up or total submission. It was just the very natural, mutual respect between two people who actually value each other. During one of my visits to New York, Daniel took me out to dinner at a small, cozy family restaurant right near his new apartment. Nothing remotely fancy, but very authentic, with absolutely delicious homemade food. Right in the middle of dinner, he totally surprised me with some major news. "Emily and I are thinking about getting married, Mom. Not right now, maybe next year. We want to do things the right way, build a rock-solid foundation before taking a huge step like that." I stared right at him, deeply searching his face for any tiny trace of the superficial, blindingly ambitious Daniel who had almost married Paige. I could not find a single trace. Instead, I saw a totally calm, grounded man who had learned massive, life-altering lessons from his biggest failures. "I am incredibly happy for you, Daniel. Emily seems like a truly wonderful person." She is. And the most important part? She completely accepts me exactly as I am. She never tries to change me, and she never pressures me to keep up expensive, fake appearances we cannot actually afford. We live simply, totally within our means. That is true wisdom, son. Something some people take their entire lives to finally learn. He smiled brightly, fully recognizing the heavy truth in my words. "Dad would be incredibly proud of you, Mom. Of exactly how you handled absolutely everything. Of how you completely reinvented yourself after so much horrible pain." "I think he would be deeply proud of both of us," I replied. "Of you for finding the massive courage to actually change, to face your worst mistakes head on and actively grow from them, and of me for finally learning to value myself enough to fiercely fight back, even against the very people I love the most." That night, as we walked back to his apartment, he linked his arm through mine exactly the way his father used to do. It was a very small gesture, but incredibly powerful. A beautiful bridge connecting the bitter past and the hopeful present, between exactly what we had lost and what we were actively rebuilding. Back in Chicago, I kept up with all my events at the community center. My lecture group had grown significantly, and now we even had older men showing up who were just as vulnerable to financial abuse, just in totally different ways. One afternoon, right after a highly emotional talk where multiple people had shared their own horror stories of being completely manipulated by their relatives, an older lady walked right up to me. "Mrs. Carter, your story just gave me the exact courage I so desperately needed. First thing tomorrow morning, I am going straight to the bank to lock down all my accounts. My nephew has been aggressively pressuring me to sign over a total power of attorney, swearing up and down that it is for my own good. But now I finally see clearly. I have to fiercely protect myself." Moments exactly like that one made the whole nightmare absolutely worth it, knowing that my deep pain could become a heavy suit of armor for someone else. That my horrible experience could light up a very dark path for people who felt completely lost, exactly like I did. For my 70th birthday, Daniel put together a beautiful little celebration in Chicago. Nothing wildly expensive or over the top, just a very intimate get-together with the people who actually mattered. Carol, Mike, a few incredibly loyal neighbors, Emily, who was now a very constant, welcome presence in our lives, and of course, Daniel. We all sat out on my balcony, which I had recently expanded to fit a much bigger table, a fun little luxury I finally treated myself to with my recovered savings. We shared an amazing homemade pot roast and swapped hilarious stories about the good old days. At one point, Daniel stood up and proposed a toast. "To my mother, Mary Carter, the bravest, most dignified, and absolutely most generous woman I have ever known, who taught me, sometimes in ways I never saw coming, that self-respect is the absolute bedrock of any real relationship, who proved to me by pure example that it is never, ever too late to furiously fight for what is right, to deeply value yourself, and to start totally over." Tears immediately filled my eyes, but they were completely different tears than the ones from those awful, dark days. These were tears of deep gratitude, of pure recognition, of the beautiful, undeniable truth that even the absolute most painful journeys can lead you to incredibly gorgeous destinations. "And to Edward," Carol added, raising her glass right toward my husband's picture sitting on the table, "who, somehow, is still actively guiding every single one of us." That night, after absolutely everyone had gone home and I was left totally alone in the peaceful quiet of my apartment, I sat down in Edward's old rocking chair. I stared out at the bustling streets of Chicago through the big window, the exact same streets that had witnessed my worst pain and were now witnessing my total rebirth. I thought about absolutely everything that had gone down over these last few years, about how one vicious, cruel message had kicked off a massive chain of events that, while incredibly painful, forced me to discover a level of sheer power I had no idea I possessed, about how I finally learned to fiercely defend myself, to value my own life, to aggressively demand the basic respect I absolutely deserved. And I also thought very deeply about forgiveness, not the cheap, easy, fake kind of forgiveness that totally ignores the consequences and pretends nothing bad ever happened, but conscious, hard-earned forgiveness, the kind you have to work for, the kind that fully acknowledges the horrible damage done, but actively chooses not to let that damage completely dictate the future. Daniel and I had walked down an incredibly long road. Our relationship would never, ever be exactly the same as it was before. It had deep, permanent scars, very sensitive spots that would probably always need extra care when you touched them. But it also had a brand new depth, a raw honesty that was totally missing before, a mutual, rock-solid respect earned entirely through brutal pain and total reconciliation. "We did it, Edward," I whispered right to my husband's photograph. It was not easy. It was absolutely nothing like we ever would have planned. But we did it. The cool Chicago night breeze gently rocked the beautiful flowers sitting on my balcony. It was almost as if Edward was nodding right back at me, confirming that, yes, we had actually found our way back home. Not just to the physical house, although I had fiercely saved that too, but to that quiet, safe house inside your soul, where pure peace, true dignity, and absolute self-love actually live. And as I slowly rocked back and forth, I silently gave thanks for that cruel message that had caused me so much brutal agony, because it was the exact thing that finally woke me up from a toxic life of totally endless sacrifices, of totally unconditional surrender, of giving out absolute love without demanding a single drop of self-respect. My own son banned me from attending his wedding, I thought to myself, thinking all the way back to the very start of this insane journey. And it turned out to be the absolute greatest gift he ever could have given me. With that crazy, beautiful paradox in my mind, I closed my eyes and let the cool evening breeze totally rock me to sleep, completely at peace with my past, incredibly grateful for my present, and, for the very first time in a very long time, genuinely excited for my future.